Hello and welcome to Between the Lines. On this episode, I will be speaking with Adrienne Stevenson from Ottawa. From Ottawa. Hello, Adrienne, and welcome to Between the Lines.
Hello.
What's it like in Ottawa right now?
It's sunny. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Okay, that's not what I remember about Ottawa. But anyway, that's a 30-year-old memory. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the interview, I wonder if you might be willing to take a couple of minutes and tell the audience about Adrienne Stevenson and what makes Adrienne.
Okay, where to start?
The beginning.
At the beginning? Oh no, I'm not going to start there. That's too far back. I've lived in Ottawa now for nearly 50 years. I came up here for grad school and never left. Both my job and my partners were here, so we never went anywhere else. I grew up in St. Catharines, though, in the Niagara Peninsula. I did my BSc at McMaster and my MSc at Ottawa U. And after that, I trained as a forensic toxicologist and worked in the RCMP crime labs for 6 years. And then I got a really interesting job with the Canadian Parimutuel Agency. And so for the rest of my career, I managed the federal program that tests racehorses for drugs.
That conjures up a pee like a racehorse.
Something like that, yeah. Only I was in the regulatory and research and quality and managing the program more than collecting the pee.
Okay.
But since retiring from that, I've done lots of things I didn't have either the time or the bandwidth to do while I was working, and obviously writing is one of those. I did some consulting for a few years, but I shut that down before the pandemic. We've got a huge garden, something of a victory garden. We have both food and flowers. We've traveled a lot. We've spent quite a bit of time in New Zealand, which we absolutely love. We feel a lot. We have a lot in common with New Zealanders. We've got several friends down there, and they're a small country in the shadow of a big monster, and so are we. Music is big in my life. Although I do so less than I wanted to, I play piano and guitar, not all that well, but I enjoy it. I also have picked up dulcimer and auto harp. I'm more of a folk musician than anything else. I've also gotten into genealogy. I've done a lot of research in my family history. And then, as you've already noticed from the books behind me, I'm kind of a reading addict. I was an early reader, and I've gobbled up books ever since, both fiction and nonfiction, many genres.
For those of you who are actually hearing this, because this is going to be an audio podcast, from what I can see behind her, the wall behind her is just a wall of books. I think I can only see 3 levels high. It probably goes a little bit higher and a little bit lower than what I can visually see. But my first question to her was, is that a virtual background or is that real? And she assured me it was real.
There are 7 shelves on that wall.
Oh my goodness. And I'm seeing maybe 2 sections, so is it even wider?
Yes, it's the entire width of the room. It's those brackets with shelves.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a voracious reader.
Yes, I am a voracious reader. My partner refers to our house as the library and himself as long-suffering.
Now, I recently read somewhere that any place that has amassed a collection of 500 books or more is actually considered a library.
Well, and I live in a library.
You just made a lot of people jealous. Is there anything else you want to add to your little bit of bio?
I think think that pretty much covers it. I like a lot of different things, and I try to do a lot of different things too.
Yes. And we've established that she is from Ottawa, or she lives in Ottawa, which is, of course, my hometown. And but as far as Ottawa goes, we lived miles apart. When you said you were, what was that job you had with forensic toxicologist?
Toxicology, yes.
You had me scared at the mention of RCMP, because my prints probably came across you somewhere.
No print. So only if you were deceased. We saw our cases in little tubes and jars, not in fingerprinting or anything like that.
Well, there are times when I felt deceased, let me tell you. I had my cousin's husband was a photographer, forensic photographer for the RCMP. So that was another nervous moment to have that in the family. All right. Well, if there's nothing else you want to add to your telling us about who you are and what makes you who you are, we're going to get right into what's called question period. And this is where we're going to find out about, well, your writing and stuff. So question number one, what inspired you to start writing?
This is really crazy. I wonder why I chose it, because I've been writing almost as long as I've been reading. So inspiration is a bit moot. I mean, if you're going back to the beginning, my mother still has a poetry chapbook that I made when I was about 5 years old in crayon on construction paper, illustrated with doodles. I mean, so how do I know what inspired me to do that?
Well, I mean, did you, growing up, somebody at school read a story or a poem and boom, you had this idea, or?
No, not really. I've written poetry off and on most of my life. Writing just seemed a natural form of expression for me. But then things got into, and I read constantly, but I chose a science stream for my formal education. So most of my adult writing ended up being not very inspirational, nonfiction, reports, scientific papers, regulations, that kind of thing. But I kept on reading, and I always loved reading history and historical fiction. And then when I got into genealogy, I started to write mostly factual stories about my family history. And it wasn't until quite late, in my late 40s, that I began to write fiction. And I guess if there was any kind of inspiration for me to really get going and keep going, a friend of mine on a message board told me about NaNoWriMo. That kind of got me jump started, because I had never, ever finished a fictional piece. And that got me to actually finish something.
Oh, cool.
So there you go. I mean, I don't know if that's really inspiration, but it kind of got the ball rolling.
It sounds inspirational to me. I mean, something had to coerce you or convince you to start writing, right? Which is an inspiration in itself somewhere, somehow.
Yeah.
And what did you do with that? We'll talk about that later. How do you think
terrible?
What's that?
It was terrible.
Was it?
Oh yeah, really bad.
Well, there's always a chance for improvement, right?
Absolutely.
How do you think your Canadian identity has influenced your writing?
Hugely. I enjoy reading books that take place in Canada or involve Canadians, especially historical ones. And I think that's mainly because, at least in my opinion, we weren't taught much Canadian history in school. And what we got was mostly Western European, or else the explorers. Oh, God, the endless explorers. In my day, which is back a bit, my grade 12 history ended up with the causes of World War I. That was as far as we got. I knew more about the Peloponnesian and Napoleonic Wars than I did about anything that happened in Canada. But I grew up in a part of the country that was steeped in Canadian history, directly involved in the War of 1812,
Yeah.
the Fenian raids, the Underground Railroad, tons of things.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there were plenty of women involved in those events, but hardly any made it into the textbooks.
Well, you know what they say about the history books, who writes those, right?
Exactly. And I figured if I wanted to read about the history that interested me, I was probably going to have to write my own books.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, on my show, we try not to get political or, platforming or things like that, which is very easy to do, especially in writing. But I like to we like talking about writing, and that's what we do. But we do know that history, what we learn as history, is not totally accurate.
Oh, for sure.
That's as far as I will go on any platform.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, that's pretty interesting stuff. I wrote, I can remember the very first short story I ever wrote, and it was called "The Ghost of Mackenzie King." And it was, Mackenzie King, his ghost through Parliament Hill and scaring everybody, and and that's why some of the decisions that governments have made over the years were made, because they got scared by William Lyon Mackenzie King.
Right. Oh dear, that's funny. Actually, that you could make that really funny. I hope it was.
I don't remember it. That was like a long time ago,
Yeah.
like maybe even grade 5. So,
the other thing, and maybe this is very Canadian, it's a kind of a negative influence. Agents often say that if you want to sell books, they should be set in the US or the UK. And I think that is just so, I don't know, so last century, if you want to look at it. I mean, Scandi Noir is so successful, with books set in other places. So why not Canadians? I mean, we need to tell people, we need to tell ourselves our stories, and we need to tell other people our stories too.
well, you see, the thing though is that Canadians, we're too polite. But
Probably.
if Canadians were to be accurate in the stories that they tell, we're not so polite.
No, but if the rest of the world rates us so highly, then we should really be telling them more of our stories. And it has started. There's a lot more of it now, but I guess I wanted to be part of that.
There's a YouTube channel that I watch, and it's rather interesting, and it's called Canadiana.
Mm-hmm.
And it's stories about Canada that most people don't know.
Yeah.
Like, like Meech Lake, where, the Meech Lake Accord was signed and all that sort of stuff. Well, that has a disappearing, well, I can't even remember the story now, but it's an interesting story. Or out in BC in Vancouver, there's two mountains called the Lions. And it tells the story about how they came to be, and it just some fantastic history. Or you political people will love this one. The Trump family actually got their fortune from the gold rush up in the Yukon, because Grandpa or great grandpa Trump ran a brothel on Bennett Lake.
Boy, the nut doesn't fall too far from the tree, does it?
And we'll leave it at that.
Oh, lovely. Lovely.
What themes do you often explore in your writing?
Well, you might have already guessed that feminism is high on my list, but both in historical and present day contexts, and it creeps into my poetry as well. Well, more than creeps into my poetry, but into my fiction. Probably I try to do a later touch. But how women have always been present and active, had active roles. How could we not?
Hmm.
but are so often ignored, misrepresented, denigrated, or abused, and written out of the world. And so, we need to change that. We need to make sure that we are present. But and then there's a lot that ties in very much with historiography and the whole imperialist viewpoint, how history is made. That history is all stories,
Hmm.
and so, who's to say that the story that I told in my novel, or that the stories that somebody else told in theirs, isn't just as true as what is written in the conventional textbooks. And so there's that kind of thing. And then I'm writing about people, so family and loyalty, are and belonging. These are important things. Also, survival and perseverance, just to keep going and make the most of life, as in spite of whatever throws up in your way.
Well, do you think readers want to read about fictional people's everyday life, or do
Yeah,
they want the extraordinary?
well, I mean, I'm a reader myself,
And that's
and
why
I
I
want
asked.
to read about things that happen to people and how they react to things. I'm not one of these, you have to keep escalating um the trauma to your protagonist, and keep escalating and escalating until they reach a crisis, and then whatever happens
But that's
happens.
the formula.
That's a formula. I don't think I don't want to be total formulaic if I can avoid it. Yes, I want things to be happening. I want people to be doing things, but I don't want to. This it's kind of a the big publishers formula. It's like that's what sells. Well, I want to write books that I want to write, and that I want to read. So, and I think one of the things that talking with other writers of historical fiction is that they do want the intimate details. They do want to smell and taste and see what another time was like. So, yeah, I do think those things are important.
Which brings to mind another question that, I mean, has been in past seasons, but seems to always come back into this one is who do you write for then? Or what do you write for? I mean, are you in it for the money? If anybody says they're in writing for the money, they need anyway. Um, but
Absolutely.
who do you write for? Do you write for a particular audience, or do you write for yourself, hoping that what you are happy with for you is happy, makes other people happy, or makes other people think, or whatever?
I guess it depends on your own needs and purposes. If you are in a position where you must earn your living and writing is the only skill you can turn to, then you will become, in all likelihood, one of either one of the few remaining journalists. I don't know really if that's even a possibility anymore, but you'll become one of these people that writes multiple series to a formula and sells them on Amazon. And some of those people go on, I mean, they write 4 books a year. I'm not saying they probably write the same book 4 times in 4 different series. And they change things enough so that people don't notice or are happy to just read the same thing over again.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can make enough to get to live on. But if you have the luxury of either a day job or a good pension, or are otherwise not reliant on your writing to survive, then I think you do write for yourself. I would have a really hard time if I only wrote to a formula. I just I don't know if I could do it.
It would drive me nuts personally.
Yeah. That's
Um,
the thing think in the end you do have to write for yourself, because otherwise, I mean, life is too short.
Yeah. I have a saying, and I believe I created the saying, and it's something that I live by, but um, how does it go now? It goes, I don't write for profit, I profit from my writing, which is to say that every time I write something, I mean, it's not because I want to sell it, it's because I want to grow or I want to learn something. And then I write about it, and it defines me in some degree.
I think that's a really good way to put it. I agree with that completely.
Thank you. And in a couple of my books, I've got 12 self-published books, and probably half of them have this saying as well, is that I do not necessarily write because I have something to say, but rather because there may be something you need to hear.
Well, that's interesting. Well, no, but I think that some of the best books, I mean, they usually sneak up on it, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
You learn in spite of yourself.
That's how I have to do it. What challenges do you think contemporary writers face?
Okay, well, there's two biggies, and the first one is probably one more people are kind of interested in, and that's getting traditionally published. I mean, with the consolidation in the publishing industry, there's just an enormous barrier. Literary agents are, of course, the gatekeepers to that system, and it's not easy to attract their notice. And even if you do get noticed, if they don't think you're commercially viable, the door will close. And the problem with small publishers is they're very fragile, and they accept very few books. They do accept the unagented manuscripts, and I'm sure they read them, but they're mostly too small to take many on. And so there's an awful lot of good books out there that languish. And even if you've done all the right things, you've workshopped your manuscript, you've had a good critique group, it's been professionally edited, even if you've had it professionally designed, including the cover, there's almost zero chance you'll find a publisher. Vanishingly small. So unless you've got friends or family in the business, and even then, it may not wash. So if it wasn't for indie publishing, the situation would be completely untenable.
Mm-hmm.
And so you self-publish. More writers are doing it all the time.
Well, it's easier to.
It's much easier to. But that means there's a glut on the market, and you're still challenged to be seen. And AI content is just aggravating an already difficult space.
and a whole different subject.
Sorry. Yes, it is, isn't it? We won't go there.
Well, the rest of the show would be anyway.
Yes, exactly. But the other big thing is marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Because even the big publishing companies don't put much money or effort into promoting anything but their A-listers. So to him that has shall be given. The average writer has to do it themselves, even if you are traditionally published.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a professional website to attract people to sign up for your mailing list and establish a following, write blog entries and newsletters, get reviews, seek out bookstores to take books on consignment, deal with the incredibly horrible websites of Amazon and Ingram Spark, and the whole process. It's costly in both time and money. And if anybody thinks they can make a living while being an independent writer, they should be aware that creators of content are the last ones to get paid and the ones squeezed for every cent.
Truer words could not have been spoken.
So why do we do it? We do it because we have to, I guess. I don't know.
Well, some people are compelled to write for the sake of writing.
Yeah.
I love to write. I love to write. Love to write. And, I've convinced myself of that, and that's why I write. But whether it's good or not,
I
you
think it's
brought
good
up
if you get
family.
satisfaction.
What's that?
If you get satisfaction, then it's good.
Well, exactly. I remember when I was putting out my first book, Blind Ambitions, together. A lot of family, air quotes, and friends, air quotes. Oh yeah, that's fantastic. It's wonderful. Publish it and I'll buy it, and all these promises, and you can't trust family or friends to support you. That's just a fantasy world right there.
Yeah. Well, or only so much. Because if you count on selling books to people, you only know so many people, and that's only so many books. So even if they do come through for you, it's a limited pool.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like on Facebook, I belong to two writing groups, and one of them is my own, and one of them is a different one. And between the two groups, there's about 15,000 members.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, mine has the fewer members, but nonetheless, and I think 15,000 people that know my name from those two groups is a good place for me to say, oh, I've got a new book out. I've got a new book out. And that's a good starting place, but there still has to be a drive to put it out there. And which is part of the reason why I do this podcast, is because there's a lot of great writers and authors out there who will never get the opportunity to be showcased or spotlighted. And without shows like this, and there's a couple of others that I listen to that bring these authors and writers in, so the world can see that, hey, you know what? These aren't like A-listers, but man, they're good.
Yeah.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But
yeah, all I ask of a book is that it be good. I mean, I don't care who's written it. If I get to about page 50 and I'm not going anywhere, I put it down.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Writer beware. How do you think literature can challenge or change social norms and values?
Well, as I was just saying, I think for literature to have any influence on social norms and values, the first thing it has to do is be well written so that people will read it. And then it has to use a light touch. You need to sneak up on issues and surprise people with other possibilities, help them to think differently. Because I think books can make you look at different perspectives and put yourselves in the shoes of somebody from a different culture or a different time or place. I mean, those can have a huge influence, especially if you read them when you're younger, say in your teens and 20s.
Mm-hmm.
YA literature is very important for that. And it's one of the biggest, I guess, booming parts of fiction now. Dystopian fiction in particular, like The Hunger Games, the biggest example. I mean, it exposes the extremes of our society. It's a reality TV show taken to the ultimate. It shows class divisions made concrete. It's the madness of extreme wealth and all kinds of other issues. In my life, dystopia came mostly through the news and folk music. I mean, I grew up in the 1960s during the folk revival and the Woodstock years and years of protest, which was hugely influential on much of my generation. We thought we became peaceniks, back to the landers, that kind of stuff. But we kind of backslid, didn't we? We
just a little.
Yeah, a huge amount. It's terrible. But there was a utopian element too, because at that point I was reading a ton of science fiction. And most of the science fiction, at least the stuff that I enjoyed reading, was optimistic. It was progressive, even aspirational. the idea that our civilization might progress, might survive, and go on to be better than we are. I mean, to have that kind of optimism, boy, I wish I had it today.
You must have liked Star Trek then.
Oh, I loved Star Trek, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, because that was the Earth has united, and there's no sickness, there's no monetary, there's no social class division anymore, and that's what everybody wanted and was striving for
Yep.
until those darn Klingons and Vulcans showed up. But anyway,
Well, they had their moments as well.
yeah. Uh, Next question before I start laughing too much. How do you think the Canadian literary scene compares to that of other countries?
Oh boy.
Yeah, big
Yeah.
sigh.
Well, I think as in so many other areas, we're kind of our own worst enemies. We don't blow our own horn or hustle as hard as our neighbors to the south, for one thing. We're overshadowed in our own country, and part of that is down to the fact that they are big and loud, but it's also that an awful lot of our writers still set their books in other places, usually in their country of origin if they're immigrants. Um, and whether it's mysteries that are set in the US or the UK, or other literature set in other cultures, it's still very common for our writers not to write about Canada. And as you said before, we've got this huge country with so many different peoples in it, and so much going on. I mean, it's not always a bad thing for them to write about other stuff. We can't always be navel gazing, but we need more immigrant experiences of Canada for a better balance in our literary world. And obviously, as well as Indigenous and colonial descendants. And then there's Quebec, but I'm talking about books.
And then there's Quebec.
Well, it's its own little microcosm.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
But would you say that the Canadian literary scene, which is dominated by just a few big pushers, have their own agendas that they require of the writers that they want to push? And it's so the little guy like me who doesn't write into what they want will never see the light of day.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Our traditional literary scene is still dominated by CanLit, which is the academic crowd, and I feel that's a stagnant pool. I think it's the relevance is declining. I mean, so much literary fiction is inaccessible for most readers.
So what would you do to fix it?
I don't know that you can. I mean,
It needs it, certainly.
Sorry?
It needs to be fixed.
Well, I think you fix it by bypassing it. I think you fix it by because I'm having a hard time with this one.
You're welcome.
I guess things are changing in readership, and things are changing in genre and commercial fiction, and some of that's been ongoing for a long time. But I'm looking at more mystery writers setting their books in Canada and adopting Canadian themes and writing more in more literary ways. We're not just talking pot boilers anymore. We're talking about dealing with serious issues and dealing with them in good writing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a huge outpouring of books by Indigenous writers too. I mean, as I say, it's unfortunate that teachers of English lit are, and don't get me wrong when I say this, you know, Margaret Atwood has been extremely successful, and I have great admiration for some of her work. Others I find too depressing to go anywhere near. But we aren't all going to be like that. And there's too many people who want to get so much literary fiction, as I say, ends up being inaccessible to the average reader. And I'm not talking about talking down to people. No, I'm talking about giving people material that they can identify with, that they can find their way into, and maybe sliding a few extra ideas in there along with it.
Again, though, it this is an issue, I think, for me, and maybe I need counseling. I don't know, but I tend to think that the big five and agents try to push us. You need to read this person, or you need to read this. This is what's important for you to read, or and that's what I think they try to do. It's on the couch. And I don't know. That's just a feeling that I get.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I have not had recent exposure to English literature professors in decades, nor do I want to.
Okay.
I don't want to read Hemingway or Joyce or most of Atwood, frankly. I read Robertson Davies and enjoyed him, but that was then. This is now.
Good book.
So I think some of it gets very dated, and maybe it's good writing, but they're stuck in a last century mold.
Yeah. Do you remember? You just mentioned a book that I absolutely loved when I was younger. That was Then This Is Now, and S.E. Hinton, and she also wrote The Outsiders. And I did a little history check of her, and she wrote that when she was in high school at the age of 16. The first year that the book was published, she sold 10 copies, and now it's almost mandatory reading in high school.
Yeah. Well, things do change. I mean, they have to evolve. And at the end of the day, it's the people who actually buy and actually read the books who are going to have an impact on our literary culture.
I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I think I should research and find out. Like, you were talking about YA readers, and like, how many young readers are out there? Like, how many young adults or teens or whatever? How many of them are actually reading? I mean, it's a big market, but who's really reading it? Is there a way to find out?
I don't know. I really have. I just don't have any idea where to look, and or how valid the statistics would be. Because if we're starting to rely so much on online polls, they're so distorted. How even if it was to be a census question, I don't know how you come at it.
Well, right, but then you're not getting accurate stats. Then you're just getting driven sales, right?
But then if you look at the actual sales, and if you look at them both paper and ebook, who's buying the books? Is it the kids, or is it the parents buying it for them? I don't know. I don't know. Good question. What I do believe is that in books, as it is in films, that people will only take so much of the sameness before they want to go on to something else. This whole Marvel universe thing. It's it has a lifespan.
I think it's run its course already.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they've used the bigger of the storylines in Marvel already, and now they're looking for those quote unquote hidden gems or obscure stories that maybe might do something in the theater. But I think they've run their course.
Yeah.
Personally.
Wow.
How do you think being a part of a writing community has impacted your work?
Oh, well, here I get to be positive, unreservedly positive, because I have to say more than I ever would have thought. I mean, you cannot over overemphasize the importance of working with other writers.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in several critique groups for both poetry and fiction. I'm a member of both in-person and online groups, and my experience across the board is that virtually all writers are amazingly generous with their time and help. I've been able to workshop my novel, get beta readers, get recommendations for an editor and a book designer. I've gone with friends to courses and master classes where there've been real collaborative atmosphere. Same thing at conferences. And I mean, most of these things, the good places are, if they have fees, they're reasonable enough that even writers can afford them.
Mm-hmm.
These days, we're not even restricted to collaboration with our local communities, which is I mean, we're not local to each other here.
Nope.
The internet has just opened things up so much, and so many opportunities to share. I've got a local poetry workshop, which since the pandemic, of course, has been meeting on Zoom, and we've got members in Indiana, in Toronto. And, we're looking at people all over the place. So, and I meet regularly in a Zoom writing room hosted by a West Coast group called the Creative Academy for Writers. And it's wonderful. There's so many people there from Canada, the United States, across the world.
Now, of course, with online, there's that warning that not everybody is what they seem to be online, so which
True
allows the opportunity. I don't know if it's an opportunity or not, but certainly allows the potential for toxicity. Do you find that there is a little toxicity in any of these groups, or are they all unique and united enough in their goal as writers that there's no toxicity?
Well, there are certainly personality differences.
That's a given, yeah.
That's a given. And some of them are such that if you don't, it's like being in a book club. If you don't enjoy the company, you move on. Oh, seriously.
There's the door, yeah.
No, but yeah, there's the door. It's always open. But if it's a good dynamic, then it feeds on itself, and usually you can keep going. Although I will give one caveat to that. I think it's important to, now that we can, to have more than one outlet. I mean, you yourself said there were a number of groups that you're involved in, and I think you get some balance by talking to different people about the craft and about your own projects. And you do have to trust people with your project at some point. I have not run up against anybody who was going to steal anybody else's work, for example. We have one participant in our poetry workshop who is very reluctant to distribute her work to the entire group until she knows everybody's going to attend. So she'll send them out to the people she knows are going to be there, but we have a couple of people who don't show up all that often, and she won't send them the work if she won't be able to discuss it with them. Different people is different strokes, right?
Right. But I mean, Canadian copyright law, I think, says as soon as it's committed to paper, you
Yeah.
own it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Apparently there are some people out there who are it's going to be like every other facet of society, that they're going to be toxic people. Well, yeah, but you either give them the heave ho or you leave yourself.
yeah, and the door swings both ways. Absolutely. So that was your seventh question that you picked.
Uh-oh.
I promise it won't hurt that badly. This is now question number 8, the unknown mysterious question. So here we go. If your latest book were a dish, what would be the main ingredient that represents its essence?
Oh man, that is a toughie.
Well, you weren't expecting to coast through this, were you?
No, not really. I knew there was going to be something like this come up. Um, I guess because my protagonist is a herbalist, I would have to say that it would be a stew flavored with herbs, a blend of herbs from her garden and from the and gathered in the wilderness, because that represents her, and it also gives all of these sort of a multiplicity of ingredients that I feel went into my book.
Okay, that's a fair enough answer. See, I read your bio when you sent the bio to me, and I saw that you had a garden, and that's kind of what prompted that question. And then, we went from there, and it worked out.
Well, that.
What advice would you give someone who wants to write but believes that, well, that they can't write?
Well, and this is supposing that they do know how to actually put a few words together on a
Well,
piece.
yeah, I mean, they're educated and stuff, and they have I think I want to be a writer, but I don't think I can write. Like, I mean, how many people, I couldn't write a poem to save my life, but I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, I would say to them, there's 3 essential tools. You get yourself a writing instrument, and you get yourself a pad of blank paper, and then you write down words. It's just that simple. You write about what you see out your window. You write about yourself, your friends, your family, your pets, if you have any.
Last night's dream, whatever.
Whatever you're interested in reading, maybe.
Yeah.
If you can, it's nice to have a place to write, a place at a time. And if you can, you set yourself up with something like that. You can maybe go to a coffee shop for a half hour, or write on your dining room table, or go to the library. I mean, go to the library is the first step, really. Because you can ask a librarian. Well, it's the second step. You have to actually get the tools.
Mm-hmm.
The tools are there in your house. I mean,
And at the library.
Pieces of paper and at the library. But you can ask the librarian so many questions. You can find out about local writing groups, open mics, evening classes at local high school. There should be a wealth of information. They can recommend books on writing, the kind of work you want to write.
Mm-hmm.
And then join a group. And if you can't find a local one, there are ones online. And there's ones that deal with so many different topics, and a lot of them are free and welcome new members.
I think you alluded to it a little bit earlier, though, is I mean, It starts with one word.
Yeah, one word. Put a word down on the page.
And then followed by another, and then another. And eventually you got a sentence, and then a paragraph. And then who knows where it goes from there. But it starts with one word.
I have a friend who says that there really isn't any such thing as writer's block. And I think that might be a little on the extreme side, but she says, she feels a hesitation to write. She says, okay, I'm going to write one sentence. And it may be crap, but I'm going to write it down. And I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to produce a sentence. And she said, I rarely get up before I've spent at least half an hour and a couple of pages writing.
Yep, absolutely. And the whole concept of writer's block, there's so many people with so many different stances on that. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, bumps in seats and fingers on keys.
Absolutely.
And talking to people, writing, part of writing is knowing your world. I mean, people don't bite, at least most of them don't.
Not the ones I hang around with.
No, me either.
But I think, and you may agree with this too, but part of being a good writer is being a good listener.
It should be. I'm a bad listener, but
I was just going to make a joke and say what?
Well, I try.
Well, yeah, but I mean, to get a sense of the world around us, we need to be attuned with all our senses, really. And for me, being visually impaired, I've lost one of those senses, so I have to rely on the others. But I mean, we've got to utilize all our senses to be able to be effective writers.
Yes, 100%.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Well, guess what? We're on to the reason why we're really doing this interview. And we are moving into shameless plugging. So shameless plugging is the part where you get to talk about, answer the questions that I'm going to point towards you about the things that you've written and so forth. So very first, right off the hop, is what books do you currently have available on the market, and where can people find them?
Okay, well, I only have one novel out, and it's called Mirrors and Smoke. It's a self-published historical novel. The main character is Rebecca Plummer, who's a Canadian herbalist and midwife. She's got a secret, a shameful secret, and a feminist outlook, a la Mary Wollstonecraft. And she's caught up in the War of 1812 in Niagara, Upper Canada now being Ontario. Rebecca has to go through a lot to keep her family and community together during wartime deprivation. And it may be of interest that most of the characters are based on real people, some of whom were my ancestors. So it grew out of some genealogical work that I had done and my general interest in the period and the locale. I know the Niagara Peninsula pretty well. Okay. I grew up there.
And where can...
Sorry.
Carry on.
No, I
was gonna say, and where can people find this book?
Yeah, it's available on Indigo.ca and Amazon.ca, and it's also on worldwide websites of Amazon in paperback, and it's listed as a paperback in the online catalogs of Barnes & Noble in the US and Waterstones in the UK. I also have it in ebook format on Kobo and Kindle. And the links to those online sales can be found on my webpage, which is very simple. It's adriennestevenson.ca.
And we'll get to that a little bit later because they'll need to know how to spell your name properly.
We will do that.
We shall do that indeed.
So if I can just go on for one little minute.
Absolutely not. Now go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I don't do direct online sales, but the links to those online things are all on my webpage. I do have some copies of the paperback out on consignment at local bookstores in Ottawa, St. Catharines, and Niagara-on-the-Lake, and deposited with some of the Niagara region libraries.
Now, where in Ottawa can people go and pick up those books?
At the moment, they could go to Singing Pebble or Books on Beechwood. Um, they, uh, um, um, oh, sorry, I'm planning to get a few more, but so far I have not.
Beechwood.
Yeah.
Is that near Beechwood Cemetery?
Uh, yeah, at the other end.
Okay, that's where all my family's buried, is in the Beechwood Cemetery.
Oh, wow. Small country, only it isn't.
Well, I've been from one end to the other, and I can attest that it's not that small,
No,
especially when you're hitchhiking it. But
sure isn't. I've also got quite a few poems and a few short stories published, and they're linked on my webpage as well.
okay, and again, we'll get to that in a little bit. Are you currently working on anything, and if so, how close to completion is it?
Yeah, well, I am working on something else. It's going slowly, but I'm working on a series that's set in the canal building era in Upper Canada.
Ah, Colonel John By.
Yes, indeed. There will be 3 different books in this: the Rideau Canal, the Welland Canal, and the Trent Canal. And
Nice.
I'm going to feature a surveyor who's a half-pay officer of the Royal Engineers and his sister, who's an artist. I'm partway through the first book, and I've got the other 2 outlined. So I'm in progress.
Wonderful. Question number 3 kind of applies, or maybe doesn't apply, but we'll try it anyway. If you had to choose one of your books or stories or poems or anything that you've written as a favorite, which one would it be and why?
Okay. Well, I've only got 1 novel published, so Mirrors and Smoke is my favorite so far.
There you go.
I think it's a good story. I enjoyed spending time with the characters, and I think other readers will too. I tried my best to situate it in its time, not be anachronistic. I really like it. Still, I mean, I'm actually quite sick of it, but I do like it. Well, you spend so much time on it, you need a little distance.
Absolutely. Hey, you know what? I was just going to say, if you've got one handy, why don't you read us one of your poems?
Okay.
Could you do that?
I could do that, yes. Yeah, I've written a lot of poems, but this one's a bit older. I actually won a prize with it, but I like it so well because it's very personal, and you'll understand why as I read it. It's called Expedition. He checks. Is she still sleeping? Good, she is. As morning beckons with its pristine snow, the light of early morning thin and pale, his skis are ready, waxed the night before in hopes that such a morning might appear. He leaves a loving note beside her bed, saying the coffee's made, he'll be back soon. Quietly turns the key to lock her safe. The car is huddled in its white duvet, feather-like drifts fall swiftly to the brush. He's on his way. Nothing can stop him now. No traffic on this pearly weekend morn. Just a few others heading to the hills, up the white roads as far as they can go, abandoning civilization while they can. Finally here, in the stillness of the park, where hawks once rose on thermals at the cliff, and beavers built their mounds out in the swamps, a land abandoned to winter's frosty breath, just a few birds to show the land still lives. He's not the first. All the main trails are groomed, but there's a private path not far along. He lifts a snow-clad branch that marks the way. It drops behind him. Few can find it now. He breaks new trail. 100 meters in, a clearing opens. ringed by snow-clad spruce and birches dripping filigrees of ice. He rests a moment, leaning on his poles, drinking in the fresh, idyllic peace and silence, frost, and beauty everywhere.
Nice. Nice. Cross-country skiing, no doubt, right?
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
I hated cross-country skiing. Well, no, because I only tried it once, and that was a high school thing, and then I tried the snowshoeing, and yeah, no, that didn't work either. But I was two left feet, and whatever. So, was there an actual memory attached to that poem, or?
Well, in many ways. I mean, it's fictional as far as it goes, but he is an avid cross country skier, and I used to, when I was a little more fit. I've had a couple of joint replacements and don't do those kinds of things anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been in those circumstances, so I know what it's like. The beautiful, really pristine snow and untouched trails and so on. Yeah.
My early upbringing, I lived beside a lake just outside of Ottawa, Constance Lake, in Canada.
Right.
And so we were on the hill, and just like 40, 50 feet down the hill was the lake, and in the winter ice fishing, but and a lot of skidooing. So those trails, fresh trails for snowmobiling, that's what I was thinking as you were. And then of course also the time that I was on the back of a skidoo and it hit some soft ice and we lost the skidoo and I kept skidding across the ice. But anyway, memories.
Just one more thing, Ray. A friend and I, this is poetry now. A friend and I have a contract with a small press here in Ottawa called Bumble Puppy to publish a poetry chapbook titled Skipping Stones, which is due out this spring.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure I got a little plug in for it as well.
That's fine. And what was your friend's name?
Marie-Andre Auclair.
There you go. Auclair. Auclaire.
No E on the end.
No E? Okay. Not the real French way then. I'm kidding.
She's French from France. She better be the real French way.
Oh, that's not Canadian French. Oh boy. There's a conflict there, Parisian French and Canadian French are two different subjects.
No kidding.
Where can people connect with you? And there's a slew of places and we can all name them. So I won't go into it because that'll just take an extra 10 seconds. And, so yeah. Where can people connect with you the best?
The best. Okay. Well, if they're on Facebook, I'm at Adrienne Stevenson Writer.
And Stevenson is with an E or an O?
Yeah. It's Son, S-O-N.
Okay.
And it's with a V as well, so Stevenson. And Adrienne is spelled Adrienne. Yeah.
Good.
So the other best place, because I'm not a huge social media participant. I do maintain a website, and I try and keep up with contacts from there. My website is adriennestevenson.ca. Adrienne Stevenson, all one word. Yeah.
And what will people find at that website?
They will find more information about me and my book and my other writing, my poetry. I have a sign-up sheet for a mailing list, and I have just a basic contact form if somebody just wants to ask me a question but not go on the mailing list.
Okay.
And it's the usual suite of things. I have a blog, and again, I would like to be more active on it, and maybe one day I will. but I do try and post occasionally. And if anybody did join my mailing list, I do not spam. I send out a very occasional post on that. Instagram, it's Adrienne Stevenson 79. I still occasionally go to Twitex. It's at AJS4T.
I'm not even sure what that is.
Twitter.
Oh, okay. X. All right. Sorry. I heard something else. Sorry.
Twitex.
Yes.
I don't know, whatever it's called, but I go there mainly for poetry groups.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Fair enough. I'm on there as well under what's my handle? Gobbledygook.
Gobbledygook.
Yep. But there's no E in gobble.
Okay.
So GOBBLDEGOOK.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, it's nonsense, right? And what better place to have nonsense than...
Yeah, that is definitely nonsense. I couldn't agree more.
I put some thought into it. And truly was amazed that it was available. So
yeah, really.
In close, or is there any other place that people can find you, or primarily that's it?
It's the best. I mean, most
you don't TikTok, do you?
No, not at all.
Yay!
No, the website's the best place to go, really.
Yeah,
and it links through to most of the other stuff too. So it's the central place to go.
All right. So then, in closing, what would you tell anyone who might be too afraid to take the chance on being published, either traditionally or even self?
Don't let it become a regret. I know some people who have written great stories but never released them into the world. Why not? I mean, you can always try to go the traditional route with a novel, but be prepared for disappointment. But if it doesn't work out, it's not as hard as it might seem to self-publish.
Hey, if a blind guy can do it.
Well, I mean, self-publishing is the easy part. Marketing is hard. And for submitting stuff, I mean, submit stuff to magazines, poems, stories. Why not try? If somebody says no, try again. There's no excuse not to send stuff out. As far as fear is what do I quote Frank Herbert and say? Fear is the little death.
Yeah, but there's that old expression or saying that to be a writer you need thick skin, but developing that skin to be able to yeah, it's going to take a lot of no's to develop that thick skin, and some people are not prepared for that.
No,
or ill-equipped to
be able to take rejection. And you know, I've got a couple of friends who have a competition with each other as to how many rejections they can get in a year. Because that means they're submitting a lot.
Well, absolutely. And I think when it comes to rejections, it's not necessarily because what you submitted was not good. It's because at that particular time, it wasn't a fit, or the person who read it might have been having a bad day and said, you know what, the heck with this, or whatever. We don't know the true reasons why they get rejected. No, it
is subjective. It's you're going to hit one person on one day. I accidentally sent the same poem to the same magazine in their next submission period. It got accepted. Yeah. You don't want to do that. That's a bad thing to do, but it can happen.
Yeah. I mean, I actually sent a poem into, what's that, Byword?
Oh, yes.
And it got rejected. And They had a really nice letter with it though, saying, hey, like this is a really good, but we're not looking for real life poetry or whatever it was. But I mean, they were really kind about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which makes it a little easier to accept the rejection. But I mean, I just, whatever, I'll go somewhere else with this.
Well, exactly.
And
And there are so many places now to go. A smaller number of print publications, but there's lots of online. And with people spending so much time online, they might just click on something and read your work.
Adrienne, this has been a lot of fun, and I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy, sunny Ottawa afternoon and for coming to do this. And I do really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the chance to be on your podcast, Randy. It was a lot of fun.
And that's a wrap for another episode of Between the Lines, the podcast. I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you who tuned in today. Your passion for literature and the written word is what makes this journey so extraordinary. But before you head back to the world beyond our literary haven, I have a quick favor. If today's episode resonated with you, help spread the word. To explore more about me or read the blog, or hear all episodes of Between the Lines, head over to www.therandylacey.ca. If you believe in the magic of writing and want to be part of the Between the Lines community, show some love by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee button in the top right corner of the page. Your support, no matter how small, helps me bring fascinating conversations with talented authors and writers. Your support is crucial to keep this literary ship sailing. Please consider subscribing to be notified of any news about future content. If you have any questions, comments, or are interested in being a guest, email me at randy.btlpodcast@gmail.com. So, until next time, happy reading, writing, and living between the lines.